All right, cool. That's an amazing like little side journey. Well, it's important to your journey, right? So you were there for a number of years, right? And then what led you from there to start Candid?
Worked at a couple other companies, lived in LA for a little while, moved to New York to join a company called Peerless, which was a YC company that we ended up selling in 2016 to Capital One. And I was the COO there, working with Kareem and Eric, who are the co-founders of Ramp, along with Gene. So after learning about credit cards at Capital One, they went and have built an amazing expense management and bill pay company.
What a monster. Yeah.
Which is a monster. Yeah, that's an example of a company that like has been linear in terms of it made shifts along the way, but like those guys have just figured out the strategy, knew what they wanted to build, and executed incredibly well, which is a rare breed. And then in 2017, I was approached by a guy who is it was a hedge fund manager at Lone Pine, which is a big, publicly traded or, public hedge fund. Let me start that one again. In 2017, I was approached by the kind of managing director at Lone Pine, which is a big, call it $25 billion hedge fund, who was the head of, he was the head of healthcare. And his dad was an orthodontist, and he knew the entire kind of history and saga of what was happening in the ortho category, that Invisalign's core patents were rolling off in 2017, that Smile Direct Club was on the path of going from $50 to $250 million in revenue in a year, because he had looked at them as an investment and said, hey, there's a better way to do this. I don't know how to do it. I need to find someone who understands it. And over a 3-4 month period, we sat down, we were kind of worked through the idea. I tried to help him find a CEO because I was at Capital One.
How did he find you? Was it just somewhat mutual introduction?
He found us through a board member that I had at Paribus. So we had one kind of independent board member.
So he had an idea. Did he have an idea, or did he just like, there's something to do here and I need someone from the tech world to help me like think through it, because I'm an MD at a hedge fund and that's not my core strength?
He had a 13-page memo on what he believed needed to be built.
Got it. So it was actually like a real product in a sense, not just like a fuzzy something to do here.
Yeah. And the core was, if you decrease the cost and make orthodontic care more convenient with high quality orthodontic oversight and care, that there's an opportunity to build a company that would look in many ways like what Smile Direct Club was trying to do, but driving better patient outcomes.
But give me the quick overview of Smile Direct Club at that point, right? So what were they not doing, or where did he see the opportunity?
Yeah, Smile Direct Club was the fastest growing, largest direct to consumer business that existed in the DTC space. I remember by 2019 we had a chart that we would show in our financing deck. And on that chart, it would show Smile Direct Club, IPO market cap, 9 billion, value of the rest of the direct to consumer companies, less than 9 billion, wow. Right? They had gone from basically nothing to, $50 million in revenue in 2 years. And originally they went in, I think with the right intentions, specifically, hey, let's provide high quality orthodontic oversight and care, and we'll partner with a third party contract manufacturer, but we're going to help bring the price down. And they, talking to some of the early folks that were involved there, in early orthodontists, that was the original mission. And what happened was
was it basically like they would like mold your teeth, send you essentially what Invisalign sends you, but just lowering the cost tremendously, and then theoretically you'd have oversight from an orthodontist who would manage your care. But yeah. It was just like, yeah, okay.
That was all theoretical.
Right. Okay.
So what happened was they send you the putty in the mail, you do your impressions, you send it back, they send you aligners, and they're, in theory, you're getting oversight, but you weren't, right? There was no, what in our world is called post-market surveillance, which is if you're a medical device company, you need to make sure that you're tracking what's happening with patients.
Right.
And then eventually they moved into retail. So they had stores, which they called Smile Shops, and they had the direct-to-consumer version of the world.
Wait, so just walk me through. So they would send you do the putty. They'd send you your like your first set, right? Because my understanding of orthodontists now, I was with someone who had railroads, but like, didn't you have to like every X amount of time they would send you like, oh, now there's a new set to like move your teeth in a different direction, or was it literally just one mold that you had for the whole time?
One mold, and then you use computer-aided design to set up and predict how the teeth are going to move and manufacture, call it 20 sets of aligners
Oh, 20 sets. Okay. Yeah.
20 bottoms. And then if your teeth aren't moving the way they're supposed to, you would more or less self-report and say, hey, I don't like where I am. I need what's called a refinement. So then they'd send you more putty, and then you'd send it back to them, and then they'd make you a new set of trays until you got to where you wanted to go. And that was how the business worked.
And I imagine like if I'm Joe Schmo, I have no idea if my teeth are moving in the right direction at model 3 of 20. Like, so how do I know whether to tell them, I need a realignment?
You've got no idea. There was no real monitoring. Eventually you could take photos of your teeth and send it to them. But orthodontics is it's a professional, like really tough, complicated science that takes 12 to 24 months to really get it right. And 90% of dentists in the US are doing one clear aligner case or less per month because it's hard.
Right.
Right.
And also when they're not doing the clear aligner cases, or maybe even when they are with regular railroad braces, they were in my teeth, in my mouth very often. It's like the idea, I get it, like it makes sense at a high level that you could just take a picture and we'll be able to tell if your teeth are moving in the right direction. Sounds great. Like it reminds me, I met a guy like 7 years ago who was an early stage investor, like just a single guy, and he like not at a fund, and he invested in this orthotic insert company that they were like, we'll just take a picture of your heel and we'll be able to like output a sole. And like within a year, the company just folded because like people were like, they were screwing up their feet because like a picture is not enough to like make, or at least at that time, I don't know about now, but at that time, like a picture from your iPhone was not enough to make like a real sole to like solve whatever challenges you're having with your arch support.
It turns out clinical oversight is important in healthcare.
Yeah.
Right. Like shocker. And right. So but when Smile Direct Club out of the gate, they actually were trying to do that. It turned out that when you added clinical oversight, it made the business model too hard. And so they kind of call it dumbed down. They went from a network of, trained licensed orthodontists to a network of dentists. They brought it in-house. And it was basically if you had teeth and they weren't straight and you didn't have crazy things going on, you'd get aligners. Right. And they launched TV ads back when people still watch TV, right?
Yeah.
And scaled up social media, and we're spending tens of millions of dollars a quarter, and we're just growing like gangbusters. And that business ended up, I think 2018 probably raised at a $3 billion valuation. It was like based on revenue and kind of future profitability, it was warranted. I mean, this thing was. But
this MD saw a hole in the model. Like he even in 2017, he's coming to you saying something is not right there, and so he comes to you with an idea.
And the hole in the model was these guys are playing fast and loose. Eventually, everyone's going to realize it. And
wait, I have to pause you.
Yeah,
because there's a parallel here that I wonder about if you thought about it at the time. Rideshare companies played fast and loose, especially led by Uber. And there was a ton of press at the time that Joe Schmo driver is not certified, not licensed. They're going to get into more accidents. It's going to be unsafe for everyone on the road. And so I guess when someone came to you and said, oh, and you saw how that played out, which actually it turned out like there were other maybe negative effects, but like that didn't seem like it was a true one. And so when this MD comes to you and says, oh, it needs to be overseen by a professional, did you have a moment of like skepticism, being like, oh, I've heard that before, like you're wrong, this can actually be, was there any of that?
I recognize it as healthcare, and healthcare is different.
Hugely different, right?
Getting a driver's license is pretty easy. Right. Becoming an orthodontist is like a 10-year endeavor.
It's like oh my God, Elizabeth Holmes, what's it called? Theranos story. Right. Yeah. It's like you can build apps and they can have bugs. Testing someone's blood for cancer it's very different.
It's a different, it's a different ballgame. So I mean, I'm sure like out of the gate, it was like, oh yeah, but and that's part of my story, right? Is we eventually we'll get to what ended up happening on the pivot side. And part of the learning is really getting deeper on the clinical front and learning where there were errors in that original, again, thesis of what the business should look like. So we start looking for a CEO. Eventually, I kind of convince myself that I want to be the CEO of this company, bring on an amazing team, raise a little bit of capital. We raised 1.9 million from Arena Ventures, and we're off to the races. And I remember this MD, it was his wedding, and we launched with an article on TechCrunch, as you did at that time, and we got like 500 orders in the first 48 hours from this article that ended up getting syndicated and was on the front page of Yahoo, right? So I guess folks listening may remember that people used to have like Yahoo as their homepage. This
Yep.
is the thing. And it ended up on Business Insider, pre-paywall. So then people could, click through it. I remember it's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and he kind of looks over at me, during the wedding. He's like, "How many orders do we have?" This is really, really exciting. Like we were right on kind of the precipice.
I hope he never told his wife that story.
Yeah. I think she knew. He was motivated. So we end up kind of scaling up super quickly, right? The next 2 or 3 years are a bit of a blur, but just to give you an idea, we went from 1 to 11 to 54 million in revenue the first 3 years. So it's just 17, 18, 19. The plans for 2020, for a host of reasons, we adjusted them, but somewhere between 100 and 200 million was the plan for 2020. Smile Direct Club goes out and is going public, and at a $9 billion market cap. And we have Goldman and Morgan Stanley and Evercore in our offices, 3 times each, like pitching us on raising 100 million and $1 billion, right? Like all the things that if you hearken back to like the blitz scaling days of
D2C, yep.
D2C, 17, 18, 19, we were
Facebook and Google just crushing it on the advertising side.
Crushing it on ads, turning out that like that was the place to invest, not direct to consumer businesses. Like all of those things kind of happening and definitely getting caught up in the growth. And we had gone from, call it 10 employees in a small apartment off Union Square, then maybe 30 where we had the second floor and the 5th floor in that apartment building, and the rest of it was like an illegal Airbnb den, right? And eventually we raised something like another $63 million in our Series B. We started opening retail, so we're copying what Smile Direct was doing.
And was the retail purely for initial sales, or also for post sale follow up with the orthodontist?
Just initial. Okay. Just initial. So you go in, you scan.
It was like when Casper opened their stores, and it was just like, oh, now, right, exactly.
It's the same thing, right? So we're looking at Warby, we're looking at Casper. The woman who did Warby's stores was the woman who helped us with our stores. I mean, it's super incestuous at the time in New York with the Harry's, Warby, Blue Apron. Everybody.
I remember.
Everyone's in that world. Yeah, they're in everyone's building. And we end up in, call it early 2020, at something like 500 employees. We've got 20 plus retail locations, have between 150 and 200 people in Columbus, Ohio. We move into a New York office.
Columbus is where you're doing manufacturing or something else?
Customer support. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We were doing manufacturing with a third party, but we started our vertical integration process in 2019 and opened that in 2021. So we built our own manufacturing initially in California with our head of manufacturing, and eventually moved that near shore to Mexico, where it just the economics make a lot more sense with having it just across the border. But we are in like full tilt scale mode. But when SDC went public, it was, I think, the worst performing IPO of its scale ever. It was down like 25% on day one, right? It totally killed the momentum on the fundraise. And we all of a sudden were in this position where we're like trying to raise, people have gone from incredibly interested to, hey, we're not very interested in this at all. And, there's COVID is,
it's like a wet blanket that happens, and investors go quiet.
Yeah. So we move into this New York office space that we get 2 floors delivered.
This is still pre-COVID. This is still
pre-COVID. This is January 2020. We get the 3rd floor, so it's 36,000 square feet. The 3rd floor gets delivered to us in May of 2020, just to give you an idea. It's $2.2 million a year. And then we have the office in Columbus, which is like 4 floors, for 250, 300 people. And that office is another, $800,000 a year. So you've got like $3 million in corporate real estate plus
per year that you're probably, contracted to for some number of years.
A decade, right? And then you've got 25, I forget the exact number, but let's just say 25 retail locations that are going, and COVID is like about.
No, wait. Now at this point, I feel like when we talked last time, you said there was some, you were starting to have some concerns, or you had some inkling about the model even before COVID, right? There was something. So what What was it? You have all this growth. Everyone's telling you you're great. What was it? A metric? Was it something that felt off? And if you want to tell what it is now, or if you want to save it for later, that's fine. But was there something that what was it?
In the summer of 2019, we integrated an AI-powered monitoring tool, digital monitoring of patients into our offering. And originally it was you had to buy it. And then later on, it became a default part of the product to track what was happening with patients. And as we started in 2017, somebody once told us, I forget who it was, but you can be a bad orthodontist for about 3 to 5 years before anybody knows. And remember, starting in 2017, here we are, early 2020, and what you're seeing is more and more patients are finishing with results that are not ideal. And even though we had US licensed orthodontists who were reviewing and overseeing every case, and technically treating every case, because we built this kind of like virtual DSO model where the orthos were actually the treating doctors and we were the kind of managed service, the services company in between that was making all the connections and doing the manufacturing. We ultimately kind of had the perspective that we needed to flip from doing at-home impressions to doing retail.
Because were your customers just not getting the impressions right? Like it was just not doing it properly? Yeah.
I mean, there were years of the business dedicated to figuring out how to get patients to do at-home impressions well. And technology developed and built to like scan the impressions and remodel what the gums looked like based on photos because the impressions weren't good enough. And, all kinds of time spent on that, which we're not going to get into those gory details now. But what we saw was, and kind of figured out and heard from our orthos was that, look, like this is a clinical product. 80% of the cases we can do, about 20% we can't. And we ended up kind of more like a 30% rejection rate on cases. It turned out that the orthos were like, you shouldn't be treating a lot of this stuff. And one, because it was their license. So they wanted to make sure that they were kind of risk mitigating. And two, because there's a lot of complexity. So we saw that some amount of in-person care was critical. And we had started the process, and the plan was by March 31, 2020, to shut down our direct-to-consumer model and move everything to a retail-first model where patients would come in, they would have a dentist in person who would...
In one of those 20 locations? Like, is that the... Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Who would review them, look in their mouth, review the case, and be able to support that individual patient during treatment as needed, but have the orthodontist oversee everything virtually. And so we figured that out. So
you solve a massive early problem of the bad impressions, right? And that's, which is probably a huge time suck for your team.
Yes. Right. And so from that point forward, and we'll get into COVID in a second, which just completely destroyed our business in every way, shape, and form. But when we were on the precipice of making that change. In fact, we'd announced the change to the company internally, and all of the orthodontists who were part of our network, everyone was super excited about that being the strategic move for the business. And then COVID hit. And it turns out that, people coming into retail stopped entirely. And we were doing about $5 million in revenue a month. That went to $1 million because we took our foot off the gas. We were having financing troubles because we were trying to raise a round. We didn't get the round done pre the COVID shutdowns, and everything stopped.
So you had to turn off marketing also, and so you're right. So you have these expensive leases. You have a huge team, right? It's like
you've got
perfect storm.
You've got 500 plus people. We've got, these 20 to 25 retail leases, the corporate offices, high paid engineering team. We had an amazing engineering team, that was everyone in New York in person together. So we end up furloughing about 30%, laying off about 30%, and then cutting everyone's salaries between 50 and 75%. And
wow, that last part, let's just pause there for a second. That's huge. That's
I mean, we would have run out of money, right? So and we lost a lot of people. We basically turned over at the time. Everyone was like, okay, we'll stay, right? And then by the summer of 2020 through 21, like the engineering market, for example, hiring market, went crazy. So we basically turned over our entire engineering team when we made that move.
When did you make that decision? Do you remember what month it was?
April, late March, early April 2020.
You were early. You were like, this is lasting. Like, what gave you the confidence to say at that point, this COVID thing is not a 2 weeks, to flatten the curve thing, and this is going to be up for a while?
Well, when our revenue went from 5 million to 1 million and we had, 3 months of cash left.
So right. You couldn't afford to make a bet. Right. You were like, oh, we just have to make big changes right now.
And that was the first time where we were been thinking about this pivot, and we've been making changes incrementally. But that was the first time we did something that I think was truly crazy, which was like, we got to be super draconian about how we approach things. And we survived, right? So we made it through. We then said, hey, we got to have a hybrid model, working with our network of orthodontists. We said, look, like, there's a lot of patients who don't want to come in for care right now. COVID, like, people are scared. So we got to have both in-person and remote support. And that evolved, right? So over the next really 18 months, we rebuilt the business. We end up kind of surviving.
But before we, I want to hear all about that. But so this decision, huge layoff. What is your board saying at the time? Are they saying you got to do it right now? And then also, it's also tied in with, you had these plans to shift to a model where people had to come into the office. So what was their thoughts on what you should do, like with the team and the cost structure? And B, what did you do immediately after? Did you move to that new model? Did you have to maintain the old model because people were so scared to go into offices? Like what? Yeah.
Yeah. So July 2020. The board had said in March, you got to make all these cuts. And, we want more, right? Like more than we did, because the cash position of the company was such that we didn't have another choice, right? We were one of the beneficiaries of PPP, which truly kept the lights on for this business. Right. I mean, there were companies, I think, where this program was known for fraud. Like, we were an example of a company that was truly only existed and was able to maintain employment of a lot of people because of the PPP, which really had us until October of 2020. So we reopened, we started marketing again, in the summer, July 2020, we reopened Austin and Houston and Dallas. So Texas goes first, right? And I think Texas
and are those reopening with now orthodontists in the office, or they're still reopening without them?
Reopening without them. So we go back to the prior model because the cost didn't make sense, and because patients, just the way it was working, it was eventually we'll move back there, but we got to go back to where we were 2018, 2019 from a business standpoint, and we're going to try to do better clinically. So we integrated in all those locations, x-ray machines. We integrated a bunch of the things that you would have had a dentist do to provide our orthos with more clinical material and oversight.
Right. So it wasn't 100% yet because you couldn't do 100% yet, but it was like, okay, we're going to go as far as we can, and then we'll incrementally.
Exactly.
Right.
And we even, had patients send x-rays in on the at-home business where they were sending impressions still. Like, we really tried to go above and beyond, and our doctors were still rejecting 25, 35% of cases, depending on the doctors. We were kind of fighting with one hand tied behind our back, because without having the dentist in person or, the full clinical records, including an inpatient evaluation, the orthos were very conservative, which ultimately hurt the business model and made it more challenging. But we always tried to do the right thing. As we learned more, every single time in the history of Candid, from beginning to today, everything is about trying to do things the right way that benefit the patient and benefit the doctors. So we reopen, things start going, the investors kind of bridge the business through. We end up working with the very large corporate VC arm that's flirting with the idea of, M&A or investment. We end up in early 2021, the business is very much rebounded. We're back to, call it 30, 40 million in run rate, but the burn is a lot lower, closing $150 million round of financing at a 590 post. So doing what we thought we were actually going to do in 2019, in 2021.
That's amazing.
And we're off to the races. Like, DTC is back. We're going to launch this hybrid model. Like, we're scaling. We're going to go from spending $2 million a month on advertising to $8 million a month on advertising. We're getting to 150, 200 million run rate by the end of the year. We go from kind of the contracted business that we were up to over the summer of 21, 700 employees. I checked before to make sure I can add the exact number. So 700 employees, 40 retail locations open. We were spending $7 million a month on marketing. We had 154 million in annualized SG&A to like give ideal scale of the business. And we peaked in August of 21 at about 104 million run rate as a business.
Okay, so you're back to heady spend to grow. Those days are back, because I remember that middle of 2021 for like, I don't know, a year, for most of 2021 was just like a total rebound for the tech sector because there was so much cash flowing through the system.
So much cash and so much hope and opportunity, if you will.
Everyone's cooped up and everyone's like, let's just rip.
Yeah. And, you know, that was the plan, right? But we were behind our plan, right? We were trying to scale. And so we're going to get into the pivot now, right? Which is, I think here we are an hour in, and why people are listening to what we're talking about here. But
I don't know. I feel like there's been multiple pivots here. So I think people are getting their money's worth. Don't worry. Their money's worth, their time's worth.
Yeah. So we take a step back, right? So I take a step back and say kind of.
So this is end of 21, right? Just situate us.
Yeah. This is like, call it August 21. Take a step back. And my goal in building Candid was to increase access and affordability to high quality orthodontic care. It's been our mission from the very beginning, again, through today. And the question that we had to ask ourselves was, is the model that we were using today, one, a good business model, and two, the right clinical model to get high quality care for patients? We were seeing, again, 25 to 35% of cases getting rejected. Because we were monitoring patients through, we could see some challenges on the clinical side. And we were seeing the unit economics of the business in terms of like accruing the profits. Those profits were going to Google and Facebook and Roku. They weren't going to be going to the companies. And you could start to see the cracks that you need hundreds of millions of dollars and $1 billion in revenue to even get to break even from a business model. So you had a challenged business model and you had a challenged clinical setup. At the time, we had started a very small, I'm talking 20 cases a month, B2B operation, taking what Candid was, turning it on its side and offering it as what we called Candid Pro to dentists to offer to their patients. And I went...
Now, would that compete with Invisalign's business? Is like that the way to think about it?
Yes.
Okay.
Right way to think about it.
Okay.
And I had just done the Business Breakdowns podcast on Invisalign for Colossus, like a few months before. And I'm kind of sitting there and seeing our model. And we at the time had a president of Candid. So we were 4 years in. You know, I had kind of like done my tour of duty as, truly CEO managing the business and was in that kind of what's next mentality. And I said, hey, Catherine, I'm going to go spend 3 months on this B2B thing because I think there's something there. And this for me was a truly transformational experience. And I'm deeply grateful that I got to spend time with our customers. One of the things that I did a really bad job of in the first 4 years of Candid was, what is our company motto now, which is a reaction to that, which is customer obsession drives profitable growth. And I was so focused on the business side and how do we pull the levers on marketing and conversion optimization and, operational changes to get those impressions right, that I really wasn't spending as much time with that end consumer, end patient, end orthodontist. And one of my co-founders really spent the time with the orthos, and another one was thinking more about patients, but we didn't obsess over that as an organization, which meant that we made a lot of decisions that didn't actually make sense and weren't truly customer obsessed. And I think that's why we were unable to drive profitable growth. We certainly drove growth, but we weren't able to drive profitable growth. And spending time with these dentists and learning about their pain points, their problems, and what we had built made me realize that the bigger opportunity here for building a generational business, which is again what we set out to do when we started Candid, was actually working with the dentists and the unit economics of that business because of all of the money that we'd raised and all of the money that we built. I mean, we're talking about almost $300 million in capital raised, a big engineering team, fully vertically integrated manufacturing operations in California and soon to be Mexico, treatment planning in Costa Rica, customer support, patient software, telehealth, DSO and network. Like all of these things were actually applicable to this B2B business. And we had this amazing entry point in there because we had a few doctors who said, if you guys do this, if you guys offer this solution, we think this will be number one. But there's one catch, right? There's one catch to this, which is you can't do both DTC and B2B.
Because they'll view you as a competitor.
The channel conflict is just too great. The price that we were offering in DTC would make the business not work for the dentist. The clinical side you'd always have a stigma as being direct to consumer, which had a negative clinical.
Right.
And it won't allow you to focus, most importantly, it won't allow you to focus on your customer, because now all of a sudden you're going to be selling against your customer.
Right.
And we had this webinar. I remember we had maybe like 50 dentists come on, and like 40 of them signed up because the value proposition that we were offering them was so awesome. And it was at that moment where I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, so we've got this business. It's doing 100 million in top line, but we're burning, call it $8 million a month. So we've got, a year and change left. Hand to heart, is this going to work? And of course, this is, 6 months after raising a huge round of financing.
As it always is.
Yeah, which is really, it really sucks, right? Because like you want to make your investors, at least get them their money back, but you want to, get them a return. And there was this promise of like, they invest the money, we get to scale, they buy the company for $1 billion, right? Like that was the idea, right? Like, but, sometimes you got to make hard decisions.
Reality then happens.
Yeah. And then, so the reality is that, we look at it and the unit economics were challenging. The clinical outcomes were not at the level that we needed them to be, and we couldn't provide actual access at the level of scale that we wanted to because of the rejected cases. This would be a product that's better delivered through the general dentist. And most importantly, what is the number one thing you think about when you think about toothpaste and toothbrush ads on TV? They always want to be the number one most often recommended product by the dentist. And what was happening—
Dentist approved, right?
What was happening in direct to consumer was that dentists were saying more and more, this is bad. Don't do this. This is not good for your health. And you were getting news stories on like nightly news about, Smile Direct at the time, which is like screwing people's teeth up. And there was a really strong push against—
Right. It's like the inverse of the rising tide lifts all boats, right? It's like the going out tide, like short, what's it called? Like,
beaches
all boats, beaches all boats. Yeah.
Beaches all the whales. That's what was happening.
Right.
So we, we sit down, I sit down with my exec team. I say, this is what I'm thinking. We're going to have to make a lot.
But you, by the way, were off on your own for 3 months. So were you starting to socialize it with them before you went to them and had this conversation? Like, how did you convince them? Or were they already starting to have their doubts because they could see the P&L of the business and the run rates?
It was myself, our COO at the time, one person on the rev ops, like a head of sales type guy. It was like 5 of us that were working on it. Right? So it wasn't— When I was as the CEO, I was like, I'm going to make sure that we see this through. And we were communicating back and forth, but nobody was in the tent except for my CFO at the time of like the idea, right, that we would make this full shift. And I had a co-founder who had been the one who developed the original, what became Candid Pro concept. And he had then moved back to our core business and was super optimistic about some changes we were making in the core business. The irony of all this, that like the last 3 months of Candid DTC, like things started to work a little bit better, right? Like from an economic standpoint, but they wouldn't have gotten there, right? It was like it was a blip, and he had been driving a lot of those changes, even though he had started Candid Pro. So there was a lot of—
It's like the illusory success that like you're tempted to grab onto, but then you have to stay disciplined.
Exactly. It was a false summit.
Right.
So we're sitting there. I remember we're on the roof. One of my co-founders had this amazing apartment, and we go to his roof and we're sitting there, and I've got, the 10 members of the exec team who more or less been there since the beginning. Like we're my COO, 3 co-founders, we're all sitting there, and I'm like, basically pitch them on the idea. And I had no idea what the response would be. And it was unanimous, this is a good idea, because everybody—
it's the concept that like Mark Andreessen has been railing on now in the political realm, but like the preference cascade, where like clearly everyone was having their doubts, and then you come in and you're just like, okay, I'm going to lay it out on the table and say we should make a change, and everyone's like, oh, thank God someone said something.
Right. And during this time, I've been in touch with a couple of the board members of like,
Right.
hey, like, this is what we're thinking. Like, what do you think of this idea? And I remember from, call it like top 5 VC firm, one of our investors, and they said something to me the order of, if you get back to 10 million in, effective ARR, right, in this B2B, you'll sustain your valuation 60 times, someone will invest. And I think
Meanwhile,
that resonated with me at the time, right? Like, I shouldn't have cared, but it resonated with me at the time. And I think perhaps most importantly, and it was said in a board meeting, resonated with the board when we then took the idea, put together a whole, presentation, socialized it beforehand, but went to the board, and especially the new big investor who was could come in with like, hey, you're going to get this to here. And now I'm going to have to go back to my CEO of my $50 billion market cap company, tell them I just put 150 million in and you're pivoting on us, 9 months later. So like that ended up being the most challenging
I'm
conversation.
Sure.
But I think everybody got it and was like, okay, like, great. We don't have, we'll wait. We want to take the mark down. We'll see where it goes. VC mindset.
Yeah.
And so this is, we make the pivot officially in January of 2022. So about 3 years in filming and taping this, we're about 3 years after. And we made a lot of mistakes in that pivot.
So yeah, tell me about those.
Yeah. One, and this is what everybody will say to you, but it's true, is we didn't recognize truly that we were going from a, Series D product market fit style organization to a probably seed, right? We did 200K in Candid Pro revenue in 2021. So, seed stage
100
company.
million versus 200K.
Yeah. Well,
run rate, whatever.
Run rate. Full year revenue was less, but like 104 million.
You ended right. Yes, exactly.
Right? Like we so we're it's just a totally different ballgame. And we went from in-person to remote.
Wait, so the mistake I assume was you didn't go cut deep enough. You didn't you said you were making a mistake. You were going from a Series D to a seed company. Like, what was the mistake that you made?
Should have had 5 sales reps, 1 person in revenue operations, 2 people in marketing, 7 engineers, and a couple people in. But we couldn't stomach that idea of going from 700 people, which is where we were, and 40 retail locations, 2 manufacturing facilities, a team in Costa Rica, $80, $90 million on the balance sheet. We couldn't stomach the idea. So we just said, we'll make some cuts, right? I think we ended up cutting, 100 plus folks. And we knew that we had to support tens of thousands of patients who were actively in treatment during that time. So there was an organization that would have needed to stay to make sure that you get the outcomes to support the orthodontist network. But we should have been much more draconian at the time in recognizing that we didn't really have product market fit. And instead, what we tried to do was force it. And we go back to the Zimride Lyft experience. What we did at Zimride and Lyft was we pivoted the whole organization. And it was a very different level of product market fit and scalability in consumer versus B2B. B2B just takes more time. And so when you're going from a consumer to a B2B organization, you have to recognize that you can't just turn Facebook ads on and go from 50 to 250 million in revenue. Right. It's going to take many years before the value of the compounding that you build in the B2B side takes hold.
Right.
And so the biggest mistake that we made is we got burned down a lot, but we didn't get it down enough. Yep. And we kind of found product market fit over the next 18 months, but we didn't really have it out of the gate, and we didn't have a sales or a go-to-market strategy that was truly effective, and we didn't have the right people. And we tried to take these people. I'm a deeply loyal person, so I wanted to preserve all the people that we brought. And we had an amazing team for Candid DTC, but we weren't aggressive enough in thinking about those things. And so my kind of like one piece of advice to anybody listening to this, and we'll keep talking about where Candid Pro has gone since then, which is, it's an amazing story, would be really think about it as a new company and figure out what your minimum viable resourcing required is to build and design and develop the product, and make sure you have enough time, because startups are just like everything else in kind of in company building or home building, it costs twice as much and take twice as long as you think they will. Candid Pro has been basically cost twice as much and taken twice as long as we expected. And we could have preserved over time. As the CEO and very ego driven, wasn't able to kind of consider that change. And I was hearing from the board also, right? They didn't want us to make that level of draconian change because
was their rationale? Well, I guess you'll tell me. What was their rationale? If you know it.
Our major shareholders' rationale was partially driven by internal economic markdowns and how are they going to value this and what's it going to look like. So there were those politics, and then you guys have struck gold here in Candid Pro, but you need some time to play it out. So let's make sure we resource it appropriately. We've got the balance sheet to support you. Let's get it rolling. And they ended up in a really challenging economic position post 21, post easy money, with some challenging things with the FDA, which really reoriented that organization. And one of the things we found with the corporate investor is basically everybody who worked on our deal, the sponsor, the corp dev team, the clinical folks, they're all gone, right? 4 years later, every single one of those people has left the company.
There's no one to call and say, hey, we need some help.
Yeah. And that's one of the challenges with corporate investors. They were amazing, by the way. I mean, going through this, in theory, they could have just said, we're fire the CEO, this is insane, and get our money back. And they supported us all the way through. Their ventures team, everybody was within 2 or 3 months after kind of hearing what I wanted to do, they supported it. And they ultimately came back about 6 months later and said it was the right decision to pivot, as we were seeing the Smile Direct clubs and others of the world really head downhill and a lot of challenges that they were facing. And the whole DTC market kind of 22 basically ran into a wall. And we got ahead of that, and we saw the business model. But it was definitely, the learnings were, you got to be more aggressive. You got to take out more than you think you need. We ended up going through over the next 3 years, maybe 5 or 6 different cost-cutting initiatives. Some of them, as DTC patients were rolling off,
so some of them are natural because you need to maintain the care team for the legacy customers, right? So that makes sense. But it still sounds like you could have done more earlier on on the non-care, care provision side of the legacy customers, right? That's what you're essentially getting at.
Yeah, we had to unwind 40 leases, right? We had to unwind. Well, there's a lot to figure out. Right. So
you make this pivot, yeah. So give me the last 3 years in a nutshell.
Yeah. So it turns out that the thesis that we had 8 years ago of increasing access to affordable orthodontic care is very much alive and was the right thesis. And I wrote a memo so I can look back to exactly what I was thinking in November of 2021 when we went to the board and said we want to make this pivot. And it couldn't be more spot on to where we are today in terms of what's actually happened. And we really evolved as an organization. So we adopted the customer obsession drives profitable growth mindset. We went from, being an arm's length away from our patients, who were the customers of our doctors, to being really involved with our customers. We went from being a D2C to a B2B organization, which meant we had a sales force who was talking and listening to dentists and their assistants every single day and providing feedback, designing product around what the customers were giving us feedback around. Some element of creativity in there, but really also, listening to and building product for customers. We went from 154 million to, just over 30 million in SG&A. So when you look at just the overall cost structure of the business over time, right, almost $120 million, taken out from the business over a 3-year period. We, operationally and from a discipline standpoint, my CFO and I can probably name, all couple thousand line items that exist in our P&L, of where every single dollar is going and kind of the discipline. We went from an in-person company in New York to having people in every corner of the country because we're serving all of the United States, which means we have sales reps everywhere. And we went from a clinical DTC company to a highly advanced clinical orthodontic company where I knew, and one of the things I was slightly embarrassed about was I knew very little about orthodontics before we made the pivot. to our entire company, like being required to take clinical education, right? Like really understand who our doctors are. And the business is now, many tens of millions of dollars in revenue from 200K in 2021. I think we have the DNA and understanding on how to scale, on how to grow, on how to build, but we're really doing it with an efficiency mindset. The capital consumption of the business is meaningfully down. We're not profitable yet, but we have a clear path to getting there. And I think that we are serving doctors and their patients in a way that is transformative, and dramatically increasing access to orthodontic care, because the average general dentist can now have confidence that they can deliver quality. And so we're taking the almost $300 million that we raised and everything that we built in V1 of Candid, and it's now Candid Pro. And we're leveraging that. Now, there's one other key component of this, which is we ended up running out of money. And in the summer of 2023, we had to recapitalize the business. So our shareholder base, including myself, right, completely wiped out 5-6 years of, incredibly hard work, of 16-hour days, 7 days a week, for periods in there. I had 5 co-founders, 2 founding investors, almost $300 million raised, debt warrants, all of that, to more or less to zero, with a new investor coming in and saying, we'll invest, but we're resetting everything. And that sucks. Wow. Like, for lack of a better term, for everybody who, blood, sweat, and tears, leaving it all on the field, gets wiped to zero. And that's one of the really hard parts. We work at startups because partially we believe in the dream and the potential upside that exists of building a company and the equity and the value of the equity. And we recruit people on the basis of that. And we build incredibly dense, talented organizations that buy into that mission. And at the end of the day, I was unsuccessful in delivering that for the first set of Candid investors, Candid employees. But now we're on our kind of the second leg, or maybe the sixth leg of our mission here in Candid Pro. And it's a different story, right? I think that Candid Pro is going to be a company that exists for a very long period of time, independently or not independently. But my preference is certainly that it's independent. And we have new investors, a new board of directors, and a lot more kind of energy and conviction. And I think most importantly is we had an incredible culture. I've been to like 6 weddings of people who are early Candid folks, and just so many Candid people there, and such great community built in that from this small New York team. Many folks in our Columbus office ended up pairing off and getting married and having kids. I mean, there's just this amazing culture that we had, and it died, right? In when we made those layoffs and furloughs and pay cuts in late March 2020, like that started a snowball effect.
You and so many other companies, right? Like the fantasy of everything up and to the right was burst for many, many companies.
Yeah, totally gone. So anyway, it's back, right? I was at my national sales meeting last week, and we're sitting there, and it was evident that everybody there was bought in on the culture, the excitement, the opportunity, what we're going for. And so I think these things to some extent are in the DNA of the organization and the DNA of the leadership and the people who work here, and the conviction that we have and the mission that we're on. But we've matured a lot, and we've gone through our adolescent years, and I don't know if we're in our 20s or our 30s at this point, but we're definitely wiser and more effective than we've ever been. And I'm really excited about the customers that we're serving and their patients, and the growth that we can drive for these Main Street small business owners, that we make a huge difference for them.
All right, I have that is wow, what a story. I have one last question, and then I have to go because my wife's going to kill me if I'm too much later. But the way you talk about all of the pivots, and I know you don't view them all as pivots, but the way you talk about the different iterations of the business and the changes you made, it sounds very methodical, rational, natural. Of course, we have to do this, right? Like right. And I guess I'm wondering, did it feel that way at the time, or did you agonize, lose sleep over these decisions, or was it just so glaringly obvious? Of course we have to do this, right? Because I've had this discussion with multiple other founders, some on this podcast, some other, some people are like, yeah, it was obvious we had to do this. Like, so we did it, right? And there's no emotion attached, right? It was hard. They were like, yeah, it was hard, but like, I knew I had to do it. And some are just like, it was like a really agonizing thing. And so I wonder, which side of that you fall on.
The harder part emotionally is when you feel like you're doing the right thing and it's not working.
Oh, that's the worst.
And I think I think that that's the hardest part. So the hardest part is not the pivot. It's the recognition that you need to make the change, and just being like, I had so much conviction in Candid direct to consumer, and I really believed in it. I remember Kent Bennett, who was a board observer for us from Bessemer, who famously has had, incredible success and then loss and then redemption. He led Bessemer's investment in Blue Apron, which at the time was their number one most successful exit of all time. And then I think by the time they got out, maybe they got their money back. And then also led Toast, which was an incredible, because he's been through this. And I remember him saying to me, probably in 2018, like he invested in 2017, and in 2018, something to the degree of the DTC game is up. And I was like, what do you mean the DTC game is up? And it always stuck with me because he's a really smart guy. He's like, yeah, it's up. Like any business that's, levered to spending money on Facebook and Google, like they're going to capture the profits. You guys aren't going to capture the profits. We're not doing deals like this anymore. And he and I stayed in touch, and I met with him, 6 months ago. I really respect him and kind of his thinking, but just how matter of fact that was, and the fact that it took us 3 years of trials and tribulations to then go figure it out. The hard part for me was the belief that I was doing the right thing and we were failing. And I think that the pivot in many ways was a breath of fresh air of the, call it, new relationship energy of what the opportunity was in front of us, going back to a
you
land
go from
of
banging your head against the wall, being like, why isn't it working? We should be able to make it work, to be like, oh, there were issues either that were in my control or outside of my control, that this was not going to work, at least with me at the helm or in this environment. And therefore, you look at it with a whole fresh set of eyes and say, wait, there's other opportunities, and let's go pursue those because those are exciting.
Right. Kind of the opposite of the saying, about the devil, where like the devil I knew was not the devil I wanted to play with. Like that was a bad devil. I'd rather go see if the other devil was a little bit nicer than this one, because, and getting over that, to being able to shift in founder world, you want to live in a mindset of abundance. You don't want to live in a scarcity mindset. And what happens when things aren't working and you're challenged, and this is what most of us experience, is you're in a scarcity mindset. And the new relationship energy that you derive out of your pivots, especially if it's a huge business pivot, you're going back to that 0 to 1 land of opportunity. And that's, I think, many ways why you want to really get as close to a fresh start as you can, especially.
And it's rejuvenating. And it really is re-energizing, rejuvenating 100%. Wow. What a story. Let's call it there. That is fascinating. Wow. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Nick. What a great thing. Do you want to let people know where they can find you or more about Candid? So, online, wherever you are, social?
Sure. If you happen to still be listening, you can visit us at candidpro.com. Where if you're a dentist, you can learn how to sign up. We would love to help and serve you. And if you're a patient, you can go to candidco.com and you can find a doctor. If you want to straighten your teeth, I strongly believe is the best product in the market, the best clinical oversight with the best, most awesome dentists who are highly innovative and helping patients get amazing care. So that's where you can find us. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Nick.